In this video, I want to talk about what happens to consumer surplus when something like a price change happens. So let's take, just for an example, let's consider a demand curve. Let's let demand for good 1 be given by x1 equals 20 minus 2p1. And so if I want to plot this on this graph, and it's a convention in economics to have p on the y-axis, I just want to rearrange this so I get it in the form y equals mx plus b, just to be able to plot this here. So I want p1 to be on its own. So let's rearrange the demand so we can plot it. I'll get x1 minus 20 is negative 2p1, divide both sides by negative 2. I'll get negative 1/2 x plus 10 is p1. And that's what I'll kind of plot here. Let's let this be 10, and not being too precise, but it has this demand curve has sort of a flatter slope, negative 1/2. Okay, so let's say that's my demand curve, and I want to evaluate what happens to consumer surplus when the price of good 1 goes from $2 per unit to $3 per unit. Maybe there's a tax or something like that. So let's first figure out how many units we'll purchase of good 1 at a price of $2, and figure out the consumer surplus for that situation, and then figure out the consumer surplus for this one. So if P1 is $2, somewhere like that, $2, then we can visualize the consumer surplus as being, we learned it's the area under the demand curve and above the price, because this represents the maximum willingness to pay, and this represents the amount that the consumer actually had to pay. So the benefit to the consumer of being able to purchase good 1 is this whole area, the fact that they're willing to pay more than what they actually had to pay. So what is the area of that yellow area, the yellow triangle here? The yellow triangle is consumer surplus. I'll put a 1 here for this, this is the first situation where the price was $2. It's a triangle, so we know that the area of that triangle is 1/2 the base times the height. What is the base? It's the amount of x1. This is the amount of good 1 that we chose to purchase at the price of $2. So we can put in $2 here to find out what that amount is. So 1/2, the base will be 20 minus 2 times the price of $2. That comes out to being 20 minus 4, which is 16. And then the height is just the difference between 2 and the y-intercept, which is 8. So we have the consumer surplus. The area of the yellow triangle is 1/2 of 16 times 8, or 8 times 8, which is 64. So the area of this is $64. Okay, so now let's go to the second situation. I'll make the color blue here. In the second situation, the price goes up to $3. And we want to know what the area of the, I'll highlight it in blue here. And then it kind of turns green. But what is this new consumer consumer surplus in this new situation where the price is 3? Consumer surplus 2. Still be 1/2. The base is now this distance. So now we don't purchase as many units of good 1. We purchase slightly fewer. I'll call this x2. This is our x with a 1 superscript. And we'll just plug in the price of $3 to that equation to get that. 20 minus 2 times 3. That comes out to be 20 minus 6, which is 14. And then the new height, this is at 3, the new height is 10 minus 3, which is 7. So our consumer surplus is 1/2 of 14 times 7, or 7 times 7, which is 49. And so you can see, so I guess I'll label this here. This is 49. So our consumer surplus goes from being $64 to $49. It's a reduction in the consumer surplus because the consumer is less well off when the price of the good that they're consuming goes up. And they're less well off by, what is the difference between 64 and 49? They lose $15. So I would say the consumer loses $15 in benefit because of the price change. And another thing I want to point out is that loss of $15, it can be decomposed into two effects here. There is, so this, another method we could have used in figuring out the loss to consumer welfare would be, instead of finding out the area of this triangle and the area of this triangle and subtracting them, we could have just calculated the area of this trapezoid. So there's actually two effects going on with the loss to consumer welfare because of this price change. There's this pink box here. This represents the loss to consumer welfare or benefit because the consumer has to pay more for the goods that they're purchasing. Consumer has to pay more for goods they purchase. Compare that to this extra little part. What color is left here? Maybe I'll make it purple. Then there's this triangle over here. This triangle over here is the loss to consumer welfare because the consumer does not buy as many goods. Does not buy as many of good one. This is the reduction. So we see the consumer first buying X1 and then buying less of good one. And so this is they were willing to pay this for good one, and they used to only have to pay this amount. But then when the price increased for good one, all of these purchases were made irrelevant. And by that I mean the price was no longer under the maximum willingness to pay for those units, and so the consumer no longer bought those units, and so this triangle here represents the loss to consumer welfare because the price went up, and all of these units were no longer purchased by the consumer.